I told Lizzie not to introduce me, so I'm going to introduce myself. Is that okay? I think most of y'all I've talked to on the phone, or you've heard me speak, or you don't like me, or whatever. You know, it doesn't. Whatever suits you. I may have to sit down. I sort of hurt my leg. I think it's old age, but don't tell me that. If you've been there, you'll know. When you get there, you'll know. My name is Jenifer Schaye. I'm the General Counsel for the Legislative Auditor. I've had the privilege of being the General Counsel for the Auditor for the last 23 years. Before that, I was 10 years an Assistant Attorney General, and I headed up a couple of divisions for the Attorney General, various ones, the tort division, and then my very interesting job of heading up the division that regulated gaming in Louisiana. So I've had an interesting life that I appreciate. So I think it's all gift, honestly. So I'm happy to talk with y'all today. And on behalf of the auditor, I thought he might be here this afternoon, but he's going to be here tomorrow to talk with you a minute. On behalf of the auditor, whose name is Michael Wagasback, I want to tell you thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you for giving your time. Thank you for trusting us enough whenever we ask you to do certain things. And thank you for asking us questions. As we have said many, many times, and I think it bears repeating over and over, is that we want to make sure that we're not in a gotcha group, but that we're in a group that helps you to be as accountable and transparent as we all want to be. And so that's my goal here today. Now, I'm going to tell you, I've talked a lot over the last 23 years to various people about public laws. And some of my friends will say that I can talk to that column and it'll answer. Or, you know, even if it doesn't, I don't care. And my little dog Happy will say, sometimes I talk too little and sometimes I talk too much. So this is kind of a different thing, though, for me, because I have never talked on governance guidelines. And I've prepared for it, but I'm going to look down at my notes more than I would ordinarily do because it's a new topic for me to publicly discuss. But it's not a new topic for me as a person. So what I'm going to say to you this afternoon is not saying to you, I hope, but sharing with you, because it's rather autobiographical, because this is the way I have lived my life in government service. I've been privileged enough, and I really do think it's a privilege, that I have been allowed to be a lawyer for government almost my entire legal career. When I was 27 years old, many of you know this about me, I was a Catholic nun. And they said to me at that time, the order did, they said, you're relatively smart, not the smartest person. That kind of hurt me at 27. You're not the smartest person, but we're going to send you to graduate school. And so they sent me, they said, here, you can go become, you like helping people, you can become a social worker. And you can work in the parishes. And at that time, I was in Houston. I'm born and raised in Louisiana, but I was in Houston. And they said, you can do that. And I looked up what it would be like to be a social worker, even though I like to help people. And I thought, oh, I don't want to do all that paperwork. I do not want to do that. So I got all my courage in hand, and I said to the Mother Superior, you know what I'd like to be? She said, no. What? She wasn't that interested. I said, I'd like to be a lawyer. She said, what do you know about being a lawyer? I said, I don't know much, but the social workers that we've been talking to, they always say they have to talk to the lawyer. So do you think I could be a lawyer? She said, do you know any lawyers? I said, one, my mother's cousin's a lawyer. I like him. She said, how much does it cost? I said, well, it costs $250 to take the test, the law school admittance test. Now, at that time, I was a school sister of Notre Dame, but all sisters were making about $60 a month. So for her to give me the authority, the permission to take a test that cost $250 was about 6 months' salary, right? So she gave me that permission, and I got to go to law school. And I went to law school in St. Louis, and then I was going to practice law in Texas, and the Texas bar, imagine this, said, you didn't tell us you were going to go to law school, so you can't take the Texas bar. So I'd gone 3 years to law school. I convinced her to give me the money to go to law school, and Texas tells me I can't practice law. I said, oh, that's not good. So then I said, oh, well, I'm going to see if I can take the bar in Louisiana, which was stupid. That was still stupid. I was 30 by then, but still stupid. And I didn't know about the Napoleonic Code. And my one lawyer that I knew, I called him Uncle AJ, he said, oh, that's going to be a hard test because you went to law school in Missouri, which is the English common law. But I thought I could do it. Well, guess what? I didn't do it. I conditioned the bar. Meanwhile, Texas told me I could take the test, so I take the Texas test and I pass it, but I have to come back to Louisiana and pass the Louisiana test. So my career has been between Louisiana and Texas. So once I passed the Texas bar, and I'm getting to the governance part, once I passed the Texas bar, I got my first job in government. And my first job in government was to work for, believe this or not, and that at that time was about 1979. I'm really not that old. It was my other person that did that. But he was the only Mexican-American representative in the Texas legislature from Houston. Now, that's amazing if you think of Houston today and the Texas legislature. But he was the only person, and he hired me because he had a good heart for helping people by the navigation port in Houston, and he helped me. And so I first had my first government experience. I was hired for $12,000 a year. I thought that was a ton of money. And so did the nuns, because it was going to help pay back for my law school education, which at that time, and if any of y'all have been to law school or have children who want to go to law school or who are in law school, I'm going to tell you my entire law school education at St. Louis University, which was a Jesuit school, cost $25,000, 3 years. I don't think you can go to LSU for one semester now for that, but anyway, that's what it was. So I want this to be autobiographical, but I don't want it to be a homily or a fervorino. I want it, and it's not a recipe book, but I want to help you, as I've tried to help myself and others, to know what are the characteristics of public service. But I'll tell you at the beginning, public service is unique to, and it's shaped by whoever wants to be the public servant. So my way I am a public servant is not the same way as you will be a public servant or are a public servant. And it doesn't matter what you're doing. If you're working for government or quasi-public institutions, you are a public servant. Not by definition of the law, but by your whole role. So that's what I want to talk to you about. You become a public servant by doing it, by showing that you care. And I would harken back to my first time when I was a lawyer and working in a little bitty office for this state representative in Houston. And there was a lady who worked in the office. It was all Spanish in the area. And there was a lady who worked in the office, and her name was Mrs. Sanchez. And I quickly figured out that Mrs. Sanchez was much more important than I was in that office. Because one thing was, I'm going to forget to move this thing. One thing was that she could speak Spanish, and I couldn't, and I can't. So when people came into the office, who did they go tell their problem to? Not me. I'm the lawyer. I'm supposed to be helping them. And at that time, I had the books, not the computer, and I'm supposed to be knowing what's in those books. But they would tell Ms. Sanchez what the problem was. She would barely talk to me. She had to talk to me somewhat because, you know, I had to help the people with her. But you know what? We went 6 months like that, where I walk in the morning, I say, "Good morning, Mrs. Sanchez." She says, "Buenos dias." And I go to my desk, unless somebody came in that day. Do you know when Mrs. Sanchez began to talk to me? It was 6 months after I'd been there. You know why? Because we had a critical situation in the office, and I helped somebody. And I think she saw that I really did care, and I really did want to be there. And so all of a sudden, Ms. Sanchez, who was a better public servant than I will ever be, she was helping me because she believed in me. And so what I want to give you today is some things that will help you to be of service so that people will believe in you. Because it doesn't matter how many degrees we have. It doesn't matter who your mom and dad are and all of that. It's who you are as a person and how much you want to offer in service. So Ms. Sanchez, I know she's in heaven now, and I'm hoping that she's thinking I quoted her right and everything. So here's what you are. Here's what I am. We are fiduciaries. We are trustees. We hold everything we do for another. Both Diane and Stacy talked this morning about public money, public property, public budgets. If you can remember one thing that I say to you today, it is this. Remember that your hand has to be open, because you don't own anything. It is all the public's. You are the fiduciary, you are the trustee, and that's a really good definition. A fiduciary, a trustee, does not have to be the most learned person in the room, doesn't have to be the wittiest person in the room, doesn't have to be the smartest person in the room. What does a fiduciary have to be? It has to be the most honest person in the room. It has to be the person who's most willing to go the extra mile. It has to be the person who realizes that we are holding other people's assets. And those assets might be the tax money that Stacy was talking about this morning, or it might be the people's trust. That's an asset. Or it might be the people's child. That's an asset if you're in a school board situation. Or it might be like we're in this building with the recreation center. It's people's people. That's what we're holding. And you can't do that holding in a private place. Now, what does that mean? Well, you're going to do your job, and I'm doing my job in public, with all the lights on. You can't do it any other way. You can't do it in a dark room. To be a principle of governance, I think, is to realize that you must be transparent and you must be accountable. But it doesn't mean, listen to me now, it doesn't mean that you won't make a mistake. It doesn't mean that. Sometimes that's a hard concept for people in government. You know why? Because I say to you, I'm the general counsel for the auditor. That sounds important, right? It's not. What's important is how I treat the 100th phone call I get on the phone that day. What's important is if my boss texts me at 6:30 in the morning and says, I have this issue and this issue, that I can respond. That's what it's important. But there's a tension because I know that I have to be a servant leader, but I also know I have a position. I have a job to do. I have duties and I have responsibilities. And unlike if I was in my own law firm, I'm not making my own money. I'm not getting paid by my own money. Who is paying me? It's the guy who cleans the street. It's the guy on the garbage truck that comes in my neighborhood. I am being paid by public money. So for me, one of the most important aspects of governance is to realize, although I have a responsible position, there is a tension between that and being a servant leader. I'm always knowing what is the real definition of a servant leader. The real definition in my mind is that you have to know you're the head of the pack. You're the leader in the foxhole. You're stepping out there. You're going the extra mile. That sounds good, right? But you're also the one who's willing to take the bullet. Willing to take the bullet. Willing to say, in my case, I'm sorry, Mr. Wagasback, we forgot that argument and we did not do that brief as well as we could have. That's not easy. And sometimes that happens. You have to do it. But anyone who hasn't done that, who hasn't acknowledged their failure, cannot be a leader in government. Because government, being so visible, so totally transparent, so totally asking for accountability, doesn't allow me to hide. Some people hide. In government even. Some people hide. Sometimes I hide. Everything I'm telling you, autobiographical. This is what I hope for. This is what I try for. So there is a certain dichotomy in leadership that I would tell you about. Let's talk about what's due diligence. And I should have said this at the beginning. If you want to challenge me, stop me, tell me something in between, ask a question, feel free. It won't bother me at all. Except we got to remember to get you the microphone so that our friends who are sleeping at their desks right now will wake up. They heard me, I think. Let's talk about due diligence. What does that mean? Does that mean you know the answer all the time? I would say to you, due diligence means this, that you are willing to not be intellectually arrogant. You are willing to look at all aspects of any situation that presents itself to you. Any aspects that you are willing to do what we call, and it's too often lost today, critical thinking, which means that I'm not afraid to look at all aspects of this issue, of this ball. But when I'm critical, when I'm trying to be, and being a critical thinker is a try, when I'm trying to be that, I am not an obstructionist. Now, y'all can all act like I always tell people in church, look down. We all know the obstructionists in our various government jobs, don't we? It's the one who comes in and says, Jenifer, this is terrible. You did bad. or we did bad. Sometimes they're kind enough to say we. And say, okay, how can we change it? I don't know, but I'm just telling you it's bad. That's an obstructionist. That's not somebody offering a solution. So as you're a critical thinker, as I'm a critical thinker, I have to try to make sure I'm not an obstructionist. I'm not just trying to block it. I'm not saying that it's my way or the highway. That I'm looking at what do we need to do. Now here's the hard thing in due diligence. I think this is the hardest aspect. It has to be consistent. You can't be doing it one day and go home. Or work one day and be, what do they say, quietly quitting the 4 other days. You have to be there. You have to always be on duty. Now, I cannot do due diligence by myself. I'm telling you I can't. You can't either. We're a community of people. What brings us together in that is the other word that's up there, communication. Communication is not just me talking. Communication, more importantly, is me listening. Me listening, me listening. Now, how do I listen? Sometimes it's because I'm listening to what you're saying. Sometimes it's because I'm reading what was said. Sometimes it's because I'm looking at a person's facial expressions. Communication is critical to due diligence because due diligence cannot be done alone. So you express yourself in many forms, but communication is always in there. What you say, well, do you think, what does that really mean? That means in practice that we're going to have open forums, that we're going to speak clearly, that we're going to draw no lines in the sand. Governance will be demolished in your community wherever you govern, whether it's St. John Parish or East Baton Rouge Parish or some place up in North Louisiana. Draw lines in the sand and you have no real community of interest, which makes a very bad way to live. Even when you go home, when you have lines in the sand at work, it feels terrible, doesn't it? You can't talk. I'm not kicking Happy. He weighs 10 pounds. But sometimes I'll say to Happy, you got to be quiet because I had a really bad day. I drew a line in the sand or someone else drew a line in the sand. When I draw a line in the sand, I hate myself because I realize I have shut down communication with the other person. Governance cannot happen without communication with the other person. You have to have communication. And then what happens, we get a lot of questions on this. So now we have due diligence, we have communication. Guess what's going to get better in your life when that happens? How many of y'all participate in open meetings? How many of y'all? You go to meetings, right? If you don't have due diligence and communication, your open meetings are going to be just terrible. You can write the agenda the way we tell you to write it. You cannot violate the executive session exception. You can do all of that right, but you're not going to have meaningful topics. People are going to fight at your meetings. They might fight anyway, but they're going to fight more. But if you have good communication, if due diligence is the foundation, then your meetings are going to be different. They're going to be focused. You're going to give consideration. And tomorrow, when I talk about some of the public laws, especially Local Government Budget Act, that's going to go a heck of a lot better if you have this as your foundation. I think it will. Now, you say, well, all of that sounds a little pie in the sky. I hope not, but it could. But what are you dealing with when you're governing? You're dealing with property, which is money, it's materials, it's buildings. Now, people often ask me, how do I determine what I'm supposed to do with this money, with this property, with these buildings? And the Louisiana Supreme Court in 2006 gave us a guideline that we've worked with and changed somewhat. But here's what I think, the Cabela case. Here's what we talk about with public property and how we deal with public property. And that's what you do and I do as we are participating in governance. And that is that I realize what my public function is. I know I work for the auditor's office. I know there are certain responsibilities for the auditor's office. If I work for Breck, it would be different kinds of responsibilities. If I work for a DA, different kinds of responsibilities. So I know what I'm doing there. So that's my purpose. Then what do I do with what's my purpose? Well, what the Supreme Court said in Cabela and what we have articulated is that I can't gift you. Even as I like you, I can't gift you. Because what is this that I'm part of in my governance? I'm part of a public arena. And so I can't gift you because it's not my money to give. You come to my house and I want to give you some of my money, some of my property, I can do that. But the second criteria, my duty, I can't gift you. But when we share the resources, when we figure out how the resources go together, well then what I can say is I can do that as long as I can see a benefit for my particular public entity, right? So that is how you approach property. Now you have power. The use of the property rests with you, but it's use, not abuse. If you realize the principles of Cabela, I have a duty, I can't be gratuitous, and I have to see a benefit, then it's going to cut down on, can I pay for a vacation house for me and my family when I go to a convention? That's not even going to enter your mind because it goes against Cabela. It's going to cut down on, can I buy alcohol with public money? Or here's one of my very favorite ones, and it comes more times than I can tell you. Do you mind, when we're at the convention, can I pay the golfing fees with public money? No. No. Why? Because it's public money. Because it's not part of who your governance duties are. And who does it benefit? Can I fly first class on the airplane?
I hope so. I'm sorry.
I like to do that if I could afford it.
If you pay for your own upgrade.
That's it. If I pay for my own. If I pay for my own. Can I? And this is the hard one. And so Andre gave me this question right before I started, and I said, tell the person to please call the office. And person, if you're listening, please call the office on this one. Can I benefit my family or the family of the people who are part of my governance community? Answer, no. We had a situation once in the auditor's office. I felt terrible about this. I can remember it because I felt so bad. So years later, I'm telling you, we had somebody's father-in-law who needed work. And somebody came to me and said, can so-and-so's father-in-law come in here and paint a room? And I said, I don't think so. He said, Jenifer, you know he's out of work. Can he come paint a roof? So we're the auditor's office. We can't give a benefit to one of our employees. Now, I'm not sure anybody would have known, but I knew, and the person who asked me knew, and the person whose father-in-law it was knew, and it wasn't right. We can't do a benefit. Could we help that man to make it through whatever you have to do at the people down at LWC, workers' comp commission and all that, so that he could get a job? We can do that. But we could not benefit a family member. We can't. We had another person very high in the office one time came and said, my teenage child is driving me crazy. I never had children, but I understand that view. Driving me crazy. Can that teenage child come here to work? I said, no. You're too important here. You control that person's salary. But can we help that person to get a job someplace else? Can we, not overly help, but you know what I'm saying. We all know people. We call somebody. The funny end of that funny story is, the person came to me and said, thank God you didn't let him work here. Jeez, I would have been embarrassed. Here's what they did at the other place. Well, but anyway, you understand what I mean. So that's on the property. Now let's talk about, you're doing this, why are you doing this? What is the motivation for you to be a government employee? Because we have certain people that are the beneficiaries. The beneficiaries is the public as a whole and our community. And here's where I say our community is the people of Louisiana. That's where we're so lucky that we have that thing I couldn't hardly learn after law school, the Napoleonic Code, because we base ourselves on the whole idea of family and community. So even though I can't favor my family, I can favor this community. So the beneficiary is the public and the community. And how you benefit them is sometimes lost in governance, I think, because we can think, well, I'm just a clerk. I'm the clerk of the town. How do I benefit anybody? I take the money in, I tell people no, I answer the telephone. You benefit them. You are open to the public. You tell them how they can get about government. And one of the worst things I think that's happened in modern society is the robot call. Do you agree? My father is deceased now, but he died about 5 years ago. But even before that, obviously before he died, but he could not get over that he could call anything and get a robot call. Well, now he just died because it's even more robot. Yesterday I had to call Amazon. I'm the Amazon queen in my neighborhood. And I got something from Amazon and it wasn't what I ordered. And all I wanted to do was say, okay, can I bring it back? I'm going to bring it back, okay? And I had to talk to 4 robots before I got to a person. 4 robots. And when I got to the person, I said, I'm not mad at you. I don't want you to think I'm mad at you, but this is not right. What about old people? She said, you know what the lady said to me? Said, everyone is telling us this. I say, what is this? So everybody in governance has a role. You have a very special role. Now, some of y'all are elected leaders and some of y'all are appointed leaders, right? I think if you're an elected leader, then your role in governance, besides leading, is listening. I know I'm going to keep saying the word listening. Listening before you act. listening as you see the way people react. Listening. If you're an appointed leader, or an elected leader, you always have to do that listening, because that calls to mind, for me it does, this is not for my personal gain. This is not for my personal benefit. This is a focus on people and on the community that I serve. So now let's talk. We're okay? I'm not boring you, huh? Okay. If I am, just kind of look down and don't tell me my feelings are weak. No. Elements of leadership. I just kind of like bulleted them out for you. And I'll kind of try to explain it the way autobiographically I see it. That we have delegated authority. Delegated authority means that I know from my resume and my job description what my responsibilities are. And you need to know what yours are. And if it's not clear, then make sure it gets clear with your boss. Or if you're the boss, make sure you understand what they appointed you to do or elected you to do. I think from that comes clear goals and objectives. And then you're able to communicate better. And here's the hard one, 2 hard ones. You're able to evaluate yourself and ask others to evaluate you, and you're able to give respect. Those 2, if you don't evaluate yourself in government, you cannot be in government well. If you don't give people respect in government, you will not get respect, but you will not achieve the goals and objectives. Everyone wants respect, deserves respect. So that said, what's your next element of leadership is that you have power, but that power has to be used in a discretionary fashion. If you're the clerk, you have power. If you're the mayor, you have power. If you're the chief civil deputy, you have power. If you're the fire chief, you have power. But you have to remember that this public arena that you work in, this governance, it's not a kingdom, it's a democracy. That's the difference. It's not a kingdom, it's a democracy. People will say, I hate this when people do this. They'll say, I'm going to do it because you told me to do it. Oh, geez. I don't want that. Because I want it to be, maybe I told them wrong, maybe they took it wrong, or we got to go back to square one. Because we have to work together. We don't want it to be that I'm using power over you. Now, sometimes you have to just say, we got to stop talking, we got to get it done. That's true. But usually, this power has to be discretionary. And then when we go to superior position, I say that again that you have a tension, that there's a tension between knowing what your job is, that it's your job and you have to do it, then lording it over someone. So it's like a give and take. Finally, there is trust, that your word is the most important thing. I learned by stories. I once took a very, very powerful person in Louisiana to a deposition because that powerful person had been sued by a much less person as far as the world would have seen that person. The person who sued was poor, had certain disabilities, but he had the courage to sue all these powerful people. So my job was an assistant attorney general, And my job was to take that powerful person to the deposition and represent that person at the deposition. Any of y'all ever been deposed? Okay. It's not always pleasant. So we're riding over to the deposition, and I say to the guy, my client, the powerful guy, I say, I was going to tell you this, that you might want to consider. He said, I will. And I was going to tell you, you might not want to say this. He said, good advice. I said, when we got to the place, I said, I just got to ask you, why are you listening to me? I mean, I know you know a lot more than I do. He said, because what I have learned is that every person has a part of the truth. And you have a part of the truth for me today, Jenifer. And I'm listening to you. And I'm not afraid of this deposition because I have always been a person who gave my word. And I gave my word in this situation, and I didn't do anything different. I thought that was so neat, you know, that he had given his word, and we won the case, but the poor guy didn't exactly get abused either, so don't feel bad for him. We helped him. But you know, your word is so important. So trust is so important. You remember my story. Ms. Sanchez, she didn't believe me until she saw that I tried to be. I'm not saying I was. I tried to be a person of my word. So that happens like that for you. Now, let's go into one particular aspect of governance, and that is critical thinking. I think this is something that we miss in government. Why do we miss it? Well, because we're rushed, right? Because we do the same thing 50 times, and you think the 51st time, why do I have to look at it? Well, maybe because I'm not getting paid right, or maybe because the person who asked me to do it just drives me crazy. You know, it could be 1,000 things. But critical thinking is so important because it moves our communities along. But it doesn't move them along real quick. I'm going to tell you that. It's kind of a slow process. You ever notice? You got a big issue and you move it just a little. You move it a little, you move it a little. But remember maybe some of y'all, the Russian leader, Nikita Khrushchev, who said, 1 step forward, 2 steps back. We said we were dealing with them. So critical thinking is not to be against, to be against. If you really think in your position in government that something is not right, then what you need to do is get up earlier and stay later so you can search the topic, so you can figure out what's going on. Get up earlier and stay later so that I understand that lady. So I figure out where is she coming from. And maybe she's not Darth Vader. Maybe I'm the one who has been the obstructionist. So in critical thinking, I'm working through all of those aspects for myself. I'm always reviewing, I'm always considering. Now, I'm going to tell you that I think critical thinking takes practice, and it takes having relationships in the workplace. You have to be able to say, you mind, Andre? I'm going to open your door at 3:30 this afternoon. Can we talk? And you know what I think stops us from talking a lot of times? 2 things. They're very different things. But here's what I think. One is, I don't want Andre to think I'm stupid. I want her to think I'm smart. I always say, I'm not Clarence Darrow. I'm not the smartest lawyer, but I really want you to think I am. So I want her to think I'm smart. You know what the other thing I think stops us? And it's something that I have at my desk over there, and some of you are looking at right now, and that is your phone. I think sometimes we focus so much on that phone, on that iPad, that we miss the person around us. We miss saying, help me. I want to figure this out. I don't want to spend 2 hours on social media. Let's talk as people. So that helps critical thinking. The other thing I think is time. You have to make time for critical thinking. And you can't let yourself be pushed into situations. I know that I've had to learn that over the years. You are looking at a person who 10 years ago, if you asked me to go to dinner at 7 at night, you know what time I'm gonna get there? 7:30. Now you might say, oh, did you think that was fashionably late? No, I just couldn't manage my time. I could not do that. But then, actually, I have to thank the auditor's office for this. Because when I went there, initially I was the only lawyer, and I had to figure out my time. Because I had to research the problem, write the problem, let all the smart people there, who are very many smart people there, review it, and I still had to get the project out on time. So I learned about time. Critical thinking requires time. Critical thinking doesn't require you just talking, it requires you thinking with your head, your heart, your feelings, everything. So good governance will allow you to meet time deadlines because you've planned for it. Now, I'm going to tell you again, I say some things over and over, critical thinking is not education. The PhDs in the room are not a better critical thinker than the person who graduated from high school. They're not. Critical thinker, here's my characteristics of a critical thinker. A critical thinker is one who is not afraid to ask selfless questions. Because when I critically think, I may have to change. That's selfless. Critical thinker is one who's not afraid of the hard answers. Someone gave me an evaluation once and said, think about it. And it was a hard answer for me to say, you're right. I did not do that well. Hard answer. Critical thinker is a person who allows themselves to care, who doesn't just do a rote job. He allows or she allows herself to care. And that's really a risk. The auditors always talk about risk assessments, and lawyers talk about liability. Well, if you really put yourself out there, there's going to be risk, and there's going to be time that the person is going to get bumped, but it's worth it. So that's the elements, I think, of critical thinker. Now let's talk a little bit about governance guidance. Okay, I'm in my everyday life. You tell me all this stuff, critical thinking, listening, caring, I'm in my everyday life. How do I make my everyday life be productive governance? Well, first, let me tell you how it would not be productive governance. Any of y'all ever heard about Enron? Enron was an energy company that a big accounting firm was auditing and people didn't tell the truth and they went down and thousands of people lost their jobs in a day and some people went to jail. Here's what one person said about Enron. It had become a place where the mad scramble for fees trumped good judgment. And it was that failure, not a government vendetta, that left thousands of employees jobless. Enron was not a suicide, it was a murder. Enron was not a suicide, it was a murder. Now, I would suggest to you that some people at that bank in California might be saying that in some time, the one that just went down. I don't know, but the stuff's rolling out. But we've seen Enron. People have examined Enron. So how do I make sure that my workplace is not a place of a suicide, is not a place of a suicide or of a murder, so that people don't lose their jobs, so that people are served? I say, first thing you have to do is figure out what are your specific tasks and duties. Yours. I say, what are mine? Not what are Angela Heath and Patrick Virgadamo, who are two lawyers who work with me. Every morning, I try to figure out what am I actually do it in the evening before I leave work. What are going to be my duties the next day? Sometimes I realize it's going to interact with them or with my assistant, Pam Mixon, but sometimes it doesn't. It's just me. I have to close my door and say I need X time to do this. So what are my particular jobs and duties? The second thing every day that I have to do those jobs and duties with a fiduciary care. I can't do them rote. If you find yourself doing jobs in a rote type fashion, in a routine fashion, routine is good, but you gotta think about it. Think about what's happening. You know when most accidents happen? Most car accidents, you know when most of them happen?
1 mile from.
Less than 25 miles from your house. Because you've been at that stop sign, you've been at that red light, you just ignore it. So, what do? You try to do the jobs with a fiduciary. And then I think this one is something that all of us on a daily basis face, sometimes more, sometimes less, that I'm going to be loyal to myself, my colleagues. Sometimes that's hard, to be loyal to my colleagues, to be loyal to I always call it, to be loyal to the people in the foxhole with me or in the boat with me. Because sometimes I'm saying, are they being loyal to me? I felt like she nudged me out of the boat and I was kind of hanging on. So why am I going to help her? Because I can't judge myself by what she did, but what I do. That's part of governance. That's part of governance, that I'm going to be loyal. And I'm going to be loyal to the public. That, I think, is sometimes hard for people in government like you and me. Because there's less of us, and we're a bit older, some of us, and some people ask the same question 50 times. We had a guy who he got elected recently to the council in his village. A village is 100 people or less. That guy started calling us every day for about a month. Every day. That's okay. Except the questions, because he wasn't getting the answers he wanted, he got mad with the answers. You don't understand. Okay, tell me again. So sometimes Patrick took it. I think Angela took one. We all took them. Finally, he really yells at me. Said, you got to stop. I said, what? You got to stop. I'm trying to help you. You don't want to hear me? That's okay. But you don't get to yell at me like that. So when I tell you about governance and listening to people, I'm not saying lay down like a floor mat. I'm saying be honest with them. Come back. You know what happened? About a week later, he called, and Pam, I'm in my car, and I'm famous for doing business in the car. She calls me, and I'm on the interstate, and I'm thinking, I don't want to get in an accident at college because this man's going to yell at me and I'm going to get mad. I'll just ram the car in the front of me. I don't want to do that. And so she said, you want to talk to him? And I had so much on my plate when I got to work. I said, okay. So I say, Jenifer Schaye, and he could not have been nicer. I don't really want to think it's because I told him that a few days before. I don't know. I don't know why. But he was nicer, and I could give him his answer. And we're moving on, and we're trying to help. So it's not easy to be faithful and loyal to the colleagues or to the people. Then the final thing, I think, is accountability. You have to be accountable for the assets you have and for your particular role. Because no matter what role you have, it's a leadership role. It is. And so accountable means I'm going to humbly say, and I mean this sincerely, thank you. I'm going to humbly say thank you when you tell me I did something right. But when you tell me I made a mistake, even if I don't think I made a mistake, I'm going to take it in and try to figure it out so that I don't make the same mistake again. I think that's a very important part of your leadership and your everyday leadership. Now, I'm at 2:19. Do y'all need a break? I'm going to go till 3 o'clock or close to. You want a little break? Okay? Let's take 5 minutes. I told you I've been real lucky in my life. And one of the things I did while I was being a lawyer in Houston was community organizing. It's kind of like, whatever you think about it, Together Baton Rouge or various community organizing groups in New Orleans, kind of helping people to understand what their rights are so that they can get certain improvements in their neighborhood. I really enjoy doing that, and the community organizing people help me. If somebody doesn't mind closing that, Lizzie, would you close that door? Just kind of distracts me. Thank you. One of the things community organizing people help you with is to know what is the difference between private and public relationships. And as a lawyer and as a person who's kind of developed a little expertise in employment law, I realize how important it is to distinguish between private and public relationships. And in all of those, though, there's 3 things that have to happen, whether you're in a private relationship or a public relationship. There must be respect, there must be responsibility, and you must strive for positive relationships. I think, very important. Let's talk about now, what's a private relationship? You might say, well, I know what that is. That's family, that's friends, that's my own self, right? Private relationships. Say, what's the characteristics of a private relationship? First, of course, we would always think of this, is intimacy. Also, that there's a certain treatment that's allowed because we're in a family, in a relationship. It is private relationships means it's my money, it's my time, it's my house, it's my decisions, right? When I tell you I was late, that's with private relationships. I was late, but it spilled over into my public relationships. And doesn't mean that in those relationships you didn't have the respect, the responsibility, and all that. But private is different. What I'm going to say to my friend is somewhat different than what I'm going to say to you in a public relationship. It's kind of, you know what is the difference. The difference is I'm in a role. I call it, sometimes you'll see people on the street and they'll say, hey, Jenifer, you remember? And I'll say, you're not in uniform and neither am I. So I can't remember. Because when I'm in a public relationship, I'm acting somewhat different. How different? Well, let's talk about first who are in public relationships. Co-workers, employees, I could have said employers, superiors. That's public relationships. It's where we go to relate, to do our outward work of life, right? So, all conversations in public relationships are transparent and accountable. That's why people get upset about sexual harassment, hostile work environment, certain language that might be okay at the LSU football game, but it's not okay in the break room at the auditor's office. Public relationships are different. If anybody tells you they're not different, they are different. We can call it, and we do in our office, the LLA family, but it's the LLA public family. It's not the same as my cousin and I going to the LSU baseball game. It is different. So, in public relationships, I have public responsibilities. That's why we say, be very careful to mix public and private relationships. Why? Because they're different. We in our office ask that if someone is going to date a coworker, we ask, we hope, they'll tell us, I'm going to date this person. I want to see this person. We don't want to intrude on that private relationship, but we want to help them to keep it a public relationship at work. So we'll say we had a young man and woman like that. They were both at LSU doing the audit. They starting to get to date each other. Said, we both love doing this audit, but she's willing to change. Can y'all change her? We did. They got married. Fine. They still work there. They have 2 leadership roles there, but they don't work with each other. They work under different people in entirely different aspects. So, what else is in a public relationship? A public relationship demands equitable treatment. It means that if I make this rule, it applies. If I have exceptions to the rule, it applies. But what it doesn't mean is that I'm going to favor one of my friends with that rule. Equitable treatment is part. It also means a public relationship that we have, and I referred to this earlier, what I call the foxhole mentality. In a public relationship, I am not going to embarrass you. I'm not going to always tell you what you want to hear, but I'm not going to embarrass you. And I have a right to expect that you won't embarrass me. I have a right to expect that if I say something totally stupid here today, and I might, because I still have a few more minutes to talk, that Diane's going to tell me somewhere different than up here with the mic on. That's not okay. We want to help each other to move forward. That was Siri on there. She didn't want to help me. A public relationship is respectful. It is not hostile. That's the lawsuits that are going around right now, is hostile work environment. Some of them are accurate, some of them aren't. But hostile work environment is when I just make it miserable for you to come into work. I act different to you. It's not sexual, not always sexual at all. It's that you make me so uncomfortable, I can't come there. That is alien to a public relationship. A public relationship hopefully will be where you and I, no matter what side of the line we're on, what concept we're developing, we're able to talk to each other, and it's not hostile. But we also have to be aware of our roles. We have to be aware that there are certain things that we know and we do well, and certain things we can't. When I went to work at the auditor's office, there was an auditor, the chief auditor, the legislative auditor, was Dr. Dan Kyle. Some of y'all remember him. Dr. Kyle had been a professor at LSU. He was the first certified public accountant to be the legislative auditor in Louisiana's history. And I went there, and he said to me, you need to understand our language as accountants, as auditors, as CPAs. I said, well, how do I do that? He said, I'll pay for you to go to LSU. So I'm going to go to LSU. I'm going to have to go. I love LSU. I'm going to have to go to school. He said, I'm going to pay for you to do that. Well, he paid. I'm going to have the office pay, because it's important that the general counsel understand the responsibilities of these auditors. So I took 27 hours of accounting at LSU. 27 hours. I did pretty good. I liked it. I thought, oh, wow, I think maybe I'll take the CPA test. So I passed 2 parts of the CPA test. Then my parents got sick, and I couldn't do any more. But I thought I knew something. But I'll tell you what, I know today more than I knew after I finished those courses. I know I'm not a certified public accountant, not because I didn't pass the test totally, but because that's not what I'm there for. I'm good that I understand the language, but I'm not it. So if one of the certified public accountants, the guy who's Ernie Somerville or Diane, or somebody tells me one of the GASB principles, I'm listening. If they ask me to put that up against the law, I'm trying. And I'm bringing it back to them so that they can help me to be a critical thinker, to help you all, to help our state to understand better what we're doing. So you have to know, what is your role? I've had people work for me on a more personal level who, you know, they didn't like me. Can you imagine that? Someone not liking me? My mother said she couldn't, but, you know, there are people who don't like you, like your mother. I had this one guy, he didn't like me at all. And he told me, straight out, I don't like you. You've helped me to be a better lawyer, but I don't like you. And I said, you know, I don't much care about you either. But I hired you, and you do good work. If you want to work here, you got to follow the rules. That's it. Well, that guy, he decided that wasn't worth it. So he got another job. That's okay. You know, he doesn't send me Christmas cards. I don't either. But, you know, it's okay. At least he went and did his job. You know, whatever he wanted to do in life, and I wish him the best. So you have to, like, take responsibility in public relationships. You have to be fair, equitable, but here's what I think sometimes happens. And this, I think, happens again because of those little phones that we're always looking at. That because you can write it down in an email or an instant message or on Facebook anonymously, sometimes we become so freaking harsh that we forget that we're talking to real people with real feelings. Now, I am not a softie. You could probably tell that. I am not. But I like to think that I'm growing in understanding that I'm talking to a real person, and that a real person is talking to me. And that if we remember that, even in this public arena, we will be better off. We will go forward better than if we are always being critical of each other. So that's the characteristic of a public relationship, I think. We never got any questions from yep, they're sleeping. If y'all are not sleeping, tell Andre you're not sleeping. Please. It make me feel a lot better. I've given you the standards of a public actor. Main basic standard, fiduciary, transparent. But here's one we haven't talked about too much, and that is sunshine. Every role in governance, we called it transparent, accountable, sunshine. Pam put that little thing up there so you can see that they're looking at all aspects. But sunshine is important. Do not go in a back room to tell somebody something. Don't embarrass them, but don't think you're going to do it in a way that you can intimidate them in a back room. Because that will militate against what I'm saying to you at the last one, which is that you're always listening so that y'all can come and I can come to a better truth. Okay? So that's really important in the public actor's role. You have standard as a fiduciary. You do everything transparently. You know the lights are on, and you're always listening to hear the truth. And you will know when the truth has come in your governance. You will know because all the pieces will come together. But okay, here's the postscript on that. Sometimes it doesn't happen quick, and sometimes it doesn't happen at all. It's just the price of admission, okay? We had this little thing just to show you kind of going through the maze and say, what do I really think you have to do to survive in this maze? Maze of technology and everything. I think you got to have a little humor. Got to be able to laugh at yourself. If you can't laugh at yourself, you're in trouble, right? You got to laugh at yourself. You got to say, I did such a dummy thing. I got a new car the other day. I sat in that freaking car for 30 minutes trying to figure out one button. You know, and I like technology. For my age, I'm pretty good, but I'm not that good. I said, look at this. If I had just looked down, I'd have seen it. But I couldn't find it. So, you know, you got to laugh at yourself. You got to be willing to change. What you are today in 2023 is not who you're going to be January 1, 2024. And as I say that, I say to myself, thank God. Because even though I thought I was a hot shot when I graduated from law school, thank God I didn't stay there. Y'all would have just died. I wasn't good. I'm still not perfect, not even nearly. But you want to be able to change. You want to be able to bring yourself and your colleagues. Ms. Sanchez said, when I served, she would serve. You want to bring yourself there. The final thing I think you have to have in this arena, and I've said it before, is a lack of arrogance. If you think you're the best thing in this room, or my mother used to say, that person thinks they're better than sliced bread. Sliced bread she liked. You know, there's got to be a lack of arrogance. A lack of arrogance means I am really humble. I am really knowing that I have more to learn. We call it in our profession the practice of law. I say it's called that because you're always practicing. I don't care how many times you did it. If you don't get nervous when you go to court, there's something wrong with you. If you have a lawyer who says, like this will dispel things on TV, but if you have a lawyer who says, I never lost a case, please don't hire that person. That means they hadn't tried many, because I've lost them. I lost them when I thought I was great, and I've won them when I thought I was awful. So you want to have a lack of arrogance. I say, the question is, who is watching? I want to tell you, in governance today, everyone is watching. Everyone is watching. That little thing you have, mine is purple, yours is black, whatever color it is, that little phone, all of y'all can video this. Not just my friend Marshall, who's videoing it for all the people watching us on, and you can watch again if you get bored. Everybody can video. Everybody is watching you. Everyone in your arena is watching you. Everyone. From the person who you walk in the door and they say, good morning. We have a lady at the door, Miss Kathy. She's our receptionist. She's awesome. She knows the mood of everybody. I know she does. Say, Miss Kathy, how was so-and-so today? Not so good. Okay. I might not go see him that day. No. Miss Kathy will say to me, what happened this morning? How'd you know? I could tell. So everyone is watching. Now, in this arena, and we're going to talk about it tomorrow, I am with you a little bit. In this governance arena, who's watching? Everyone, co-workers, you're watching yourself. What are you dealing with? You're dealing with public records, open meetings, public budget, public bid. All of these public things. That's why we wanted to talk today about governance. That's why Mike's going to talk about responsibilities of board members. Because you can't deal with what I call the black letter law if you haven't dealt with your own ability to govern. You could remember every single law in the law book, but be not good at governing if you don't have the elements of leadership, elements that make you a richer person. So I want to make sure that I leave you with this, and I know I'm leaving you a little bit earlier, but I think it'll be okay. Here's what I hope. That you'll govern with open hands, always realizing that the property and the assets are not yours, not mine. That you always have respect, or at least most days, have respect. That you will never forget how important it is to communicate. And that communication is more than words out of your lips. It's listening to other people. And here's my most important thing that I say to myself every day. You cannot be afraid to fail. Jenifer is going to sit in her car again and find another button she doesn't know. And she's going to struggle. I know I am. Or I'm going to try to write a brief again, or try to write a talk like this again, and have to sit down with white paper and nothing written on it. But I'm going to do it because I'm better today that somebody asked me to give this talk. I hope you're better, but I'm better that I could do that, because it leads me out of myself to think about what does it take to be a servant leader. So I hope it's not been a sermon, but more walking you through the elements of governance. And I want you to do as good as you can do. I want to give you one more final thing. That is something I always give to people, and that is my phone number, 225-339-3871. 225-339-3871. If you call there and you have a question, then I'm going to try to help you with it. If I can't, Patrick or Angela will. If it's something you want to talk about on this leadership thing, just me and you, I will. We'll talk. And if I don't call you back in a day or two, then I want you to call one other number that I want you to write down, and that is 911. Because that means that I'm in trouble. So, thank you.